This project that I'm going to present to you, it's outlined in your proceedings that you have, and it focuses on a topic related to the variation of free choice intake of salt-based minerals. So all of you that graze beef cattle or rear beef cattle, you're probably supplementing minerals to them in a form that is mixed with salt, and it relies on the cow's desire to consume that salt, right? We call that free choice. But we all agree that there's a lot of variation throughout the year on how much she eats. Now, everyone here has been told that when cows eat more mineral than what the tag says, you all believe it's because they're short on something, right? You think they need something. But those of you that have heard me talk before on minerals, you know I tell you that's not true. The cow doesn't know what she needs. The only reason she's overeating salt is because she's craving the salt, just like we crave salt sometimes. So it doesn't hurt her. She's fine. She can eat more. But all I tell people you're doing is producing expensive urine, because the cow will metabolize that salt, take the minerals out of her bloodstream, and excrete it as urine. So we're interested in understanding the factors that impact free choice intake. A lot of you, if you're budgeting on your cow-calf herd, you might budget about $30 to $50 a year on mineral. But what if she eats twice as much than she's supposed to? Now you might be up to $60 to $100 a year on your mineral budget. Now, interestingly, I have producers that are good producers, and they'll say, John, that's just cheap insurance. But the same producer will say, I can't afford another $50 of energy or protein. But yet you just put an extra $50 in mineral that she didn't need. You see what I mean? So managing this free choice intake is really an important issue. So we've never had this type of technology before, and this is what we got funded in that first year of the Beef Enhancement Grant. We engineered 6 of these, and Jeff Steele is a staff member here, very talented welder. And he built these, and then we worked with Allflex with some technology that they have for EID readers. So the back side of each of these mineral feeders has an EID system or a recorder system that registers every time the cow walks into the mineral feeder. So what we're able to do then is measure the frequency of visits to the mineral feeder for each individual cow. Now, we can't measure how much she's eating, but what we do is weigh disappearance frequently. So we know how much is disappearing from the mineral feeder, and then we divide that into the number of cows. So we know weekly disappearance, and we also know the frequency of intake. So what are we going to do with these types of data? So Juliana Hanchez is over here. She is a PhD student in our program. So what Juliana's been doing, and these data are summarized in your proceedings article, but she's been looking at the effect of breed, beef cattle breed, on the frequency of intake of trace mineralized salt. And we looked at 3 breeds. We looked at Angus, Brahmin, and Brayford. And these were developing heifers. So what she found in that data set is that the Brahmin cattle frequent the mineral feeder more times throughout the day than both of the other breeds. So they consume, or at least frequent, the mineral feeder more often. Okay? The other thing that they do that might not surprise you is that they consume more mineral during daylight hours than the others. In contrast, they seem to consume less mineral during the evening hours. Now, all of these data were collected during the heat of the summer. So most of the Angus cattle were in the shade during the daylight hours, and probably were then consuming their mineral in the evening hours, or dark period of time. So we understand that there are these behavioral differences. What we don't understand at this time is, are there nutrient requirement differences between Brahmin and Angus cattle? We haven't studied that yet. In fact, nobody has studied that, to our knowledge, anywhere in the world. There's some interesting evidence from Ethiopia in dairy cattle that suggests that Bos indicus breeds, that's these Indian breed of cattle like Brahmin, that they have a more efficient utilization of trace minerals, at least copper, than Bos taurus breeds. But we don't know how that's going to work with our beef cattle. There's some work from North Carolina State University that shows that Simmental, or continental breeds of cattle like Simmental and Charolais, have a greater copper requirement than English breeds like Angus. But again, they never looked at the Bos indicus breeds, the Indian breeds of cattle like Brahmin. So that's what we propose to do with this year's Beef Enhancement Fund grant. And that's what our proposal is going to look at. So Juliana, she's planning for her PhD work to specifically look at mineral status of pregnant Brahmin and pregnant Angus cows. And we're going to do this through a depletion model. Now what that means is we're going to feed a diet that will deplete the animal of copper and selenium. And we do that by feeding high levels of sulfur. Sulfur is ubiquitous in all of their diets. We get it through some of our fertilizers, through the plants. We get it through acid rain or sulfuric acid deposition. We get it primarily in our diets through high sulfur feedstuffs. So sulfur is an issue, and it can tie up copper and selenium. That's not usually a problem as long as it's supplemented adequately. So what we will do is we'll deplete these cows of sulfur and selenium, these two distinct breeds, and we'll watch the rate of loss of copper and selenium. She'll do that for about 90 days, and then we'll replete them and look at the rate of repletion. All right, we're going to do that over 2 consecutive years. And then when those cows calve, she'll calve them in an individual facility. We'll collect the calf at birth, we'll collect the placenta, and dissect away the largest cotyledons on that placenta and look at the selenium and copper content on that placenta, because remember that cotyledon caruncle attachment is where all those nutrients are traveling. Then we will look at the mineral status of that newborn calf and relate that back to the cow. So when we're done with this, the overall objective is to identify any potential differences in copper and selenium among these two distinct breeds, both of which are very important to beef cattle production in Florida. Why did we pick copper and selenium? Well, we know that those two minerals are the most limiting for all grazing beef cattle in Florida, the most limiting. In fact, in a survey that we did not too long ago, we surveyed 16 ranches in Florida, and almost half of them were deficient in selenium. And I would consider these as being well-managed beef cow-calf ranches. It's a very difficult mineral to supplement and make sure gets into the animals. Also, I want to point out that the cows that we're using, both are purebred, both Angus and Brahmin, and they're on loan to us from Florida producers that have reared these breeds here in the state for many generations. So I believe that these cows are well adapted to our environment. So we have a really neat situation set up right now, where over 2 consecutive years we're going to be able to measure the voluntary intake of these two breeds consuming mineral. We're going to be able to look at copper and selenium status through this very well-defined repletion and depletion cycle. And then we're going to look at the transfer of these minerals to newborn calves when the gestating cow is undergoing these nutritional treatments. When it's all done, I keep telling Juliana the goal is that her dissertation will provide evidence, provide this science that I'm telling you about before, that will help feed manufacturing companies address the potential specific differences that Brahmin cattle may have different than Angus cattle when we're trying to address mineral nutrition of these distinct breeds. So does anybody have any questions about the project or about what we're learning now?
Yeah. How are you determining that these cows are deficient?
Good.
Biopsy or?
Yeah. So the question was, when I pointed out that half of those herds were deficient in selenium, how did we determine that? So, yep, exactly. So we surveyed those herds by collecting liver tissue from the cows right at the start of the breeding season. So we tried to pick a time that was consistent for all of the herds that we looked at. And then we did a soft tissue biopsy collection, which is really quite simple, and analyzed it for selenium content. Now, some of my colleagues from other universities, we have a friendly debate or argument, and that's the peer review process that I'm telling you about. You need that criticism of your data to help keep you moving down that right path. So, John, how did you come up with deficiency? The way we do it is, Juliana's very skilled at measuring an enzyme in the blood that is dependent upon selenium. And whenever liver tissue stores get below about 0.5 milligram per kilogram, we start to see the function of this enzyme go down. So I identify that as deficiency. Other laboratories do the same, but that's how we do it. I probably extended that question a little bit more, but that's how we do it. Selenium and copper stores very well in the soft tissues of the animal. Excellent. So it's a great sentinel. We call it a sentinel source to be able to tell us about what that animal's been eating. The other problem with selenium is it's the only trace element that's regulated by the FDA. So you are not allowed by federal law to feed more than 3 milligrams a day of selenium. It's the only one. And I don't really know why that law has held for so long, because it's far below what we would consider a toxic level. But as long as the cows consume 3 milligrams a day regularly, you don't have any problem. The problem is they don't consume it on a consistent basis. So, Tony's, you probably remember when we measured 3 years of data at the old Brayford pastures, and we looked at mineral intake, and we measured that over 3 consecutive years every week in 8 herds of cows. And we looked at percent refusal, meaning they're supposed to eat 2 ounces a day, and if they had 50% refusal, well, then they ate 1 ounce a day, right? If they had 0% refusal, they ate 2. If they had 100% refusal, they ate none. And during the winter months, we would have intakes very low. They were only eating about 0.5 gram a day, I'm sorry, 0.5 ounce a day. During the summer months, when they crave salt, they eat a lot. And it's those impacts, that variation throughout the year, that really impacts trace mineral status. How about one more question?
So, am I understanding correctly that when you're feeding the mineral, you're feeding it with the salt included? Because I know some people try to do it separately, but...
Okay. So, Miss Janet said, so when we're talking about this, I'm talking about feeding it together. And she said some people feed it separately. I always try to convince people not to do that. But, however, there are a few feed companies that manufacture products where they recommend they're fed separately. And I have friends here in Florida, producers, that have been feeding it for years and get along fine. I used to try to discourage it, but now I say, heck, you're getting along fine, keep doing it. Don't change anything, because I learn something new every day. But I will tell you this. Cows only have a nutritional knowledge, what we call nutritional wisdom, to consume salt. That's it. They don't know if they're copper deficient. They don't know if they're selenium deficient. They'll never seek those elements out. And so it's important, I believe, to keep them together. We've got time for another question.
Salt in it because, like you said, they want the salt. So, and of course, growing up, everybody says, well, just give them all the mineral. That way, the salt will make them eat the mineral, and they'll get the mineral. Well, the thing is, we feed it separate. We got block salt, we have loose salt, and we have mineral on the other side without salt. And the cattle do eat it. And at different, like you're saying, at different times of year, that you'll go out there and check, and you'll think, well, they ain't eat hardly no mineral, but yet they'll be consuming the salt. But then you go back 2 or 3 months later, again, depending on whether it's raining or not raining, winter, whatever, and the mineral will be gone, because we keep it out year round and replenish it on a regular basis. So are they eating it just because it's there? If they don't have the sense or the inert ability to understand they need that mineral, Are they eating it just because it's in the box?
So the question is, she's had experiences with feeding loose salt blocks, and minerals separately, and the cows seem to eat it at different times. So a lot of these products that people call, or that are sold as called mineral, will have other ingredients in it that are palatability enhancers. Okay, and it could be like rice hulls or maybe some cottonseed meal or soybean meal that helps the palatability and will draw the cows to it a little bit. At times that they're not craving salt, they will tend to eat a little bit more of these products that might have these bean meal things in it. But there's no evidence at all that they're eating it because they have a nutritional need or a craving for it. There's no evidence at all. In fact, there is evidence to the contrary, where people have ran studies that we call cafeteria-style mineral feeding. And the cafeteria-style means that they have several different sources, several different pans, copper, selenium, cobalt, manganese, all of these. And then they let the cows eat whatever they want, and the cow's mineral status gets really messed up because they just don't know. And there's a lot of people in Florida that feed no mineral, just salt. And some of them get along just fine. So there you go. That tells you that I don't know a whole lot about the whole thing sometimes. Yes, sir?
What about multi-men?
Okay, the question is, what about multi-men? That's an injectable trace mineral. And we've worked with that product here on a few studies that we published. We've gotten along quite well with it. I always tell people that it's not a replacement for what we're talking about today. Everybody needs to have a sound mineral nutrition program that's based on oral consumption of mineral. But there might be an opportunity to utilize this type of technology in specific instances where mineral nutrition could be a problem. One of the things that we have looked at and think works, at least in our studies, is injecting at the time pre-weaning when calves are being vaccinated. Because a lot of these calves prior to weaning are selenium deficient. And this seems to really impact that result. So, and that's a problem with calves because calves don't eat a lot of mineral. Our forages are particularly devoid in selenium, and milk is very low in selenium. And that's what all the calves are getting. So that's an opportunity. I would never use it as a replacement therapy, though.
Don, am I correct in that the selenium helps protect against foot problems in cattle? Is that correct?
Well, it can. The question was if selenium help against foot problems. You probably have heard more in the literature with iodine and zinc impacting hoof issues. Selenium can have an effect because it's a strong antioxidant. So if animals are having a microbial impact on like foot rot that is microbial influence, not environmental, but microbial, selenium could play a role. But zinc is probably more closely tied to hoof integrity.